When they are applied to a man, they induce a great pain by weariness, which they inwardly excite and increase continually, even to the highest degree of impatience, which induces such infirmity in the mind and thence in the body, that the man can scarcely raise himself from his bed. This was shown me by the circumstance that when they were present I was seized with the above weakness, which left me according to the degree in which they were removed. They employed various arts of infusing weariness and consequent weakness, especially by reproofs and defamations among themselves and their associates, whose common spear they inject. There are others who in the life of the body have been most filthy, their filthiness being of such a nature as cannot be mentioned. They, by their presence and influx into the solid parts of the body, induce such a weariness of life and such a torpor of the members and joints that the man cannot raise himself out of bed. They are most contumacious and do not desist by punishments as other devils do. When they are driven away, it is not done suddenly but slowly. There were spirits attendant upon me, who induced such an impression in the stomach that I seemed to myself scarce able to live. The oppression was so great that with others it would have occasioned fainting, but they were removed, and then it instantly ceased. It was told me that such spirits are those who in the life of the body have not been habituated to any employment, not even domestic, but only to pleasure, and besides, they had lived in filthy ease and sluggishness, and had not taken any concern about others. They also despised faith. In a word, they were animals, not men. The sphere of such, with the sick, induces numbness in the members and joints. There are in the brain viscid humors, with which is mixed somewhat spirituous or vital, which viscid humours, being there thrown out from the blood, fall first between the membranes, then between the fibres, part of them into the great ventricles in the brain. The spirits who have a corresponding reference to those viscid humours are of such a quality that in consequence of a habit acquired in the life of the body, they excite scruples of conscience, and insinuate them into things of no importance, whereby they aggravate the conscience of the simple, nor do they know what ought to move the conscience, for they make a matter of conscience of everything that befalls them. Such also induce sensible anxiety into the part of the abdomen beneath the region of the diaphragm. They are also at hand in temptations and occasion anxieties which are sometimes intolerable. Such of them as correspond to the less vital viscid phlegm on such occasions keep the thought inherent in those anxieties. From experience it has been given me to learn that an inundation or flood in the spiritual sense is twofold, one being an inundation of lusts and the other of falsities. An inundation of lusts is of the voluntary part, and is of the right side of the brain, whereas an inundation of the falsities is of the intellectual part, in which is the left side of the brain. When a man who had lived in good is remitted into his proprium, thus into the sphere of his own life, there appears as it were an inundation. When he is in that inundation, he is indignant and angry, thinks restlessly, and desires vehemently in one way when the left part of the brain is inundated, where falses are, and is another when the right is inundated, where evils are. But when a man is kept in the sphere of life which he had received from the Lord by regeneration, he is altogether out of such an inundation, and is, as it were, in serenity and sunshine, and in gladness and happiness, thus far from indignation, anger, restlessness, lusts, and the like. As death comes from no other source than from sin, and sin is all that which is contrary to divine order, it is from this ground that evil closes the smallest and altogether invisible vessels of the human body, of which the next greater vessels, which are also invisible, are composed, for the smallest and altogether invisible vessels are continued to a man's interiors, hence come the first and inmost obstruction, and hence the first and inmost vitiation in the blood. This vitiation, when it increases, causes disease, and at length death. But if a man had lived the life of good, his interiors would be open to heaven, and through heaven to the Lord. Thus also the smallest and invisible vessels would be open, and the man would be without disease, and would only decrease to ultimate old age, until he became altogether an infant, but a wise one, when the body could no longer minister to its internal man or spirit, he would pass without disease out of his terrestrial body into a body such as the angels have, thus out of the world immediately into heaven. Heavenly Arcana 5711-5726. In the spiritual world, diseases are evils and falses, spiritual diseases being nothing else, for evils and falses take away health from the internal man, and induce sickness in the mind, and at length pains. Nor is anything else signified in the word by diseases, that in the word physicians, the art of physic and medicines signify preservations from evils and falses, is manifest from the passages where they are named. Heavenly Arcana 6504. By diseases are signified spiritual diseases, which are evils destroying the life of the will of good, and falses destroying the life of the understanding of truth, in a word, destroying the spiritual life, which is of faith and charity. Natural diseases also correspond to such, for every disease in the human race is from that source, because from sin. Every disease also corresponds to its evil, because the all of the life of man is from the spiritual world. Wherefore, if his spiritual life sickens, evil is also thence derived into the natural life, and becomes a disease there. Inasmuch as disease is represented the iniquities and evils of spiritual life, therefore by the diseases which the Lord healed is signified liberation from the various kinds of evil and the false which infested the church and the human race, and which would have induced spiritual death. For divine miracles are distinguished from other miracles by this, that they involve and have respect to states of the church and heavenly kingdom. On this account, the Lord's miracles consisted principally in the healing of diseases. This is meant by the Lord's words to the disciples sent from John. Tell John the things which ye hear and see. The blind see, and the lame walk. The lepers are cleansed, and the deaf hear. The dead rise again, and the poor hear the gospel. Hence it is that it is so often said that the Lord healed every disease and languor. Heavenly Arcana 8364. Swords signify works grounded in the proprium, and thence evil, because from man's proprium nothing but evil can possibly be produced, for the proprium of man is that into which he is born, and which he afterwards contracts by his own life, and whereas his proprium is thus from its very birth composed of mere evils. Therefore man must be as it were created anew, that is regenerated, in order that he may be in good, and so may be received into heaven. When he is regenerated, then the evils which are from the proprium are removed, and in the place thereof are implanted goods, which is effected by means of truths. That sores signify works, which are from man's proprium, may appear from the word where sores and wounds are mentioned. Likewise, diseases of various kinds, as leprosies, fevers, hemorrhoids, and several others, all which correspond to cupidities arising from evil loves, and thence signify them. Apocalypse explained. 962.